Right now, the January 2026 Winter Storm Fern is officially over, but the crisis in the United States is not. 153 people are dead. 18 of those deaths happened just this week in New York City alone, where temperatures plunged to minus 36 degrees Fahrenheit in some areas. As of today, February 10th, utility crews are still restoring power to thousands of homes across Louisiana and Mississippi. And here's what most people are not yet tracking. Another major winter storm is forecast to strike the eastern United States this Valentine's Day weekend. The January storm that meteorologists are now calling one of the deadliest in modern American history stretched from the Texas border to the coast of Maine. At its peak, 230 million people, roughly 70% of the United States population, were under some form of winter weather alert. More than 1 million customers lost power. Over 20,000 flights were canceled in just 4 days. Half of the continental United States was buried under snow by January 26th. Here is the important part. The people who lost power in Tennessee, Mississippi, and Louisiana during the ice storm were not just cold for a few hours. Some went without electricity for nearly 2 weeks. Hospitals in the Deep South began rationing blood supplies because donation centers could not operate. And in New York City, at least 13 homeless individuals died on the streets during a brutal cold snap that followed the snow, even though shelter beds were available. Right now, emergency management officials in Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia are preparing for round 2. The Valentine's Day storm is expected to bring heavy rain, possible flooding, and more snow and ice to the northeast. The ground is still frozen. The power grids in the south are still fragile, and the death toll from January 153 confirmed lives lost is still climbing as medical examiners review additional cases. This is the story of Winter Storm Fern, the climate forces that created it, and the systems that failed when America needed them most. In the maps and satellite loops from late January, you can see the storm taking shape over the Pacific Ocean on January 22nd. A cold core low-pressure system moved southeast of the Baja California Peninsula, pulling frigid Arctic air down from Canada and Alaska. At the same time, a wave in the upper atmosphere was stretching the polar vortex, the band of cold air that normally stays locked over the Arctic, far to the south. According to NOAA meteorologists, this Arctic air mass collided with 2 massive sources of moisture, one from the coast of California and the other from the Gulf of Mexico. That combination is what created the size and intensity of Winter Storm Fern. By January 23rd, the system was moving east across the Great Plains, dropping a wide swath of sleet, freezing rain, and snow from northern Texas to southern Arkansas. The storm did not just move, it grew. By January 24th, the Weather Prediction Center began issuing storm summary bulletins as the low-pressure wave settled along a cold front near the Gulf Coast. Snow began falling in central Arkansas in the early morning hours. Tornado warnings were issued in Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. Montgomery, Alabama, recorded wind gusts of 71 miles per hour. Then the system underwent what meteorologists call Miller B-type cyclogenesis. A new area of low pressure developed off the southeast coast on January 25th, strengthening rapidly as it moved north toward New England. By early January 26th, the storm was offshore south of Cape Cod, pulling away from the coastline as a fully formed nor'easter. At its peak, Winter Storm Fern encompassed nearly 2,000 miles of terrain. The storm dropped snow from Texas to Maine. Ice accumulations in the south reached 1 full inch in multiple states, heavy enough to snap power lines and topple trees. New Mexico's Bonito Lake recorded 31 inches of snow. Boston's Logan Airport saw 23.2 inches, the 8th highest snowfall total in that city's recorded history. The human scale of this storm is difficult to grasp. On January 24th, the number of counties under a winter storm warning was the highest ever recorded by the National Weather Service. 24 state governors issued emergency declarations. Over 10,000 flights were canceled nationwide on January 25th alone, making it the worst day for flight cancellations since March 30th, 2020, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. By mid-morning on January 26, more than half of the contiguous United States was covered in snow. Over 1 million customers were without power, most of them concentrated in Tennessee, Mississippi, and Louisiana, where the ice storm caused catastrophic damage to electrical infrastructure. Nashville Electric Service recorded the highest number of outages at one time in its entire history, 230,000 customers in the dark, and the cold did not stop. After the snow ended, an Arctic outbreak gripped the Northeast. Watertown, New York, recorded a temperature of minus 36 degrees Fahrenheit on February 9th. Shattering a daily record set in 1967 and marking the second coldest February temperature in New York State history. Wind chill values across eastern Iowa dropped below minus 40 degrees. By the time the storm finally weakened, at least 153 people had lost their lives across 24 states and 2 Canadian provinces. When you step back from the day-to-day updates and weather maps, what you see is a massive, coordinated relief effort that is still underway tonight. The American Red Cross launched what officials described as one of their largest multi-state disaster responses in recent years, deploying volunteers from Texas to New England. More than 50 Red Cross disaster workers were sent to Oklahoma alone during the height of the storm. They opened emergency shelters, provided hot meals, and handed out blankets and relief supplies to thousands of displaced residents. Walk into one of the emergency shelters still open tonight in Louisiana or Mississippi. Gym floors are lined with cots and folded blankets. Children play quietly with donated toys while their parents huddle around extension cords trying to charge phones. Volunteers from local churches and community organizations work in shifts, preparing meals in industrial kitchens and checking on elderly residents who need medication or oxygen equipment. Many of these families have been in shelters for over 2 weeks. They are waiting for 2 things that still have not fully returned: heat and certainty. But the strain on emergency systems went far beyond shelter capacity. Blood donation centers across the storm zone were forced to cancel collection events during the worst of the weather. According to the American Red Cross, the storm caused significant disruptions to the national blood supply just as hospitals were treating injuries from car crashes, hypothermia cases, and medical emergencies related to power outages. In Louisiana, 2 people died from carbon monoxide poisoning and oxygen equipment failure when the regional power grid collapsed. In New York, the crisis took a different form. After the snow ended, a prolonged Arctic cold snap settled over the city. Mayor Zoran Mamdani confirmed on February 9th that 18 people had died from cold-related causes in New York City alone. At least 13 of those victims were homeless individuals who died outdoors despite the availability of shelter beds. Some of them, according to city officials, had shelter lined up but still perished on the streets in subantarctic conditions. The city's Department of Homeless Services insisted that no one seeking shelter during a code blue alert would be turned away, but the deaths revealed the gap between policy and reality. Here is the important part. Kentucky, a state that saw 16 deaths from the storm, has extended its statewide emergency order as officials continue to assess infrastructure damage and coordinate recovery efforts. Tennessee, where 25 people died, making it tied with Mississippi for the highest state death toll, is still dealing with downed power lines and ice-damaged trees nearly 3 weeks after the storm hit. Governor Bill Lee toured affected areas and activated the National Guard to assist with debris removal and power restoration. Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves confirmed that 25 people died in his state, including a 73-year-old man killed when a tree fell on his mobile home during the ice storm. Nearly 300,000 customers lost power in Mississippi alone. The University of Mississippi in Oxford announced it would remain closed through at least February 8th due to lingering damage and hazardous conditions on campus. Pennsylvania reported 8 deaths, many of them elderly residents who suffered heart attacks or other medical emergencies while shoveling snow. 3 deaths occurred in Lehigh County alone. In Massachusetts, a snowplow struck and killed a woman in Norwood who was walking with her husband on January 25th. Logan International Airport recorded nearly 500 flight cancellations on January 26th as Boston struggled to dig out from 23 inches of snow. Utility companies across the South pre-positioned crews and equipment, but the scale of the ice damage overwhelmed even the most prepared systems. Entergy, which services large portions of Louisiana, told customers on January 27th that full power restoration would take until at least January 31st. Days later, they pushed that estimate to February 5th after high winds caused further delays. Tennessee's Nashville Electric Service brought in mutual aid crews from neighboring states, but repairing snapped power lines and freezing temperatures slowed progress to a crawl. The Federal Emergency Management Agency activated its National Response Coordination Center and pre-positioned supplies at staging areas across the storm zone. 250,000 meals, 400,000 liters of water, and 30 generators were ready at Camp Minden, Louisiana, before the storm even made landfall. 28 urban search and rescue teams were placed on standby. DHS Secretary Kristi Numa visited FEMA headquarters on January 25th to monitor the federal response. Airlines implemented flexible rebooking policies, but the sheer volume of cancellations left tens of thousands of passengers stranded in airports from Dallas to Boston. Over 11,000 flights were canceled on January 25th alone, and the ripple effects lasted for days. Some Amtrak routes were disrupted for a full week after the storm passed. They are waiting for 2 things that still have not fully returned: heat and certainty. The question now is not only how to rebuild, but how to make sure the next winter storm Fern does not push the same systems even closer to the breaking point. Start with the power grid. The ice storm that crippled Tennessee, Mississippi, and Louisiana exposed a vulnerability that infrastructure experts have warned about for years. Aging electrical systems in the Deep South are not built to handle prolonged ice events. When 1 inch of ice accumulates on power lines and tree branches, the weight becomes too much. Lines snap, transformers fail, and in rural areas, it can take days or even weeks to reach every damaged pole. Tennessee saw the worst of it. Nashville Electric Service recorded 230,000 simultaneous outages, the highest number in the utility's history. That means nearly half of Nashville's residents were without power at the peak of the storm. Trees near power lines became projectiles in high winds. Utility crews worked around the clock, but repairing infrastructure in sub-freezing temperatures is slow, dangerous work. Transportation choke points also became crisis zones. Interstate 20 in Louisiana experienced multi-day traffic backups that lasted into the end of the week. In Virginia, over 440 car crashes were reported by January 26th, forcing the closure of express lanes on I-95 and I-395. Connecticut's Tweed New Haven Airport shut down completely. LaGuardia Airport in New York closed at 1 p.m. on January 25th and did not reopen until the following morning. The blood supply crisis revealed another fragile system. When donation centers across 24 states had to cancel collection events, the national blood inventory dropped sharply just as hospitals were treating storm-related injuries and emergencies. The American Red Cross issued urgent appeals for donors, but winter weather makes it difficult for people to travel to donation sites. That created a cascading problem. Fewer donations, lower inventory, and hospitals forced to ration supplies during a medical surge. There's also a deeper climate signal. A warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture. That means when cold air and storm systems do line up, the result can be heavier snow, more intense ice storms, and larger swings between unseasonable warmth and dangerous Arctic outbreaks. NASA scientists analyzing satellite imagery from Winter Storm Fern noted that the storm's intensity and geographic reach matched patterns predicted by climate models for a warming world. Meteorologists also pointed to the stretched polar vortex as a key factor. When Arctic air that normally stays locked over northern Canada is displaced south, it can collide with moisture-rich systems from the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific Ocean. That collision is what created the size and destructive power of this storm. But climate science alone does not explain why 153 people died. Infrastructure age, emergency preparedness, and social safety nets all played a role. In New York City, 18 people died from cold exposure even though shelters were available. That points to gaps in outreach, mental health services, and trust between homeless populations and city agencies. The question now is not only how to rebuild, but how to make sure the next storm, whether it is the Valentine's Day system approaching this weekend or another Arctic outbreak next winter, does not push the same fragile systems even closer to the breaking point. Tonight, Winter Storm Fern is fading from the maps and the Valentine's Day storm is still approaching. But for millions of people, this winter will be remembered not by storm names, but by nights spent in cold houses, by long lines at shelters, and by the quiet fear of wondering what happens if the lights go out again. There were also moments of resilience. Neighbors in Tennessee ran extension cords to each other's homes so families could keep refrigerators running and charge medical devices. Volunteers in Louisiana drove hours through icy conditions to staff emergency shelters and serve hot meals. Line crews from neighboring states worked through the night in subzero wind chills to restore power to rural communities. Hospital staff in Mississippi stretched dwindling blood supplies and prioritized life-threatening surgeries. 153 people lost their lives in Winter Storm Fern. Their deaths were caused by hypothermia, car crashes on icy roads, carbon monoxide poisoning, medical emergencies during power outages, and the brutal cold that followed the snow. Each one of those deaths represents a family that will never be whole again, a community that lost a neighbor, and a system that failed to protect the most vulnerable. The storms are not over. The Valentine's Day system is forecast to bring heavy rain, possible flooding, and more snow and ice to the eastern United States this weekend. Emergency managers are preparing. Utility crews are pre-positioning equipment. Meteorologists are watching the models. We will keep tracking both the science and the human stories as this historic winter continues to unfold. If you found this update useful, consider sharing it, subscribing, and letting us know how these storms are affecting you and your family. And as always, stay safe, stay informed, and stay prepared. How do you think your community should change after what this winter has revealed?